part of the real estate strategy is to generate cash flow through income producing properties. And then one of the major benefits you get from being in that sector is the ability to offset the tax liability of that cash flow with depreciation. And it's a phenomenal tool. Oftentimes investors will use it in conjunction with the 1031 exchange, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with. And it's powerful stuff, man. It helps defer income tax payments for many, many, many years.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Our guest today is an expert in cost segregation and that tax savings that we all need to be considering as we are purchasing commercial real estate. And you're going to learn about some different asset classes today that maybe you haven't thought about doing a cost segregation study on that maybe you need to consider as an investor, owner, passive investor. But his name is Wes Mabry. He's the owner at 1245 Consulting. He's evaluated over $7.5 billion plus in real estate property improvements across a wide range of asset classes and 15 plus years in the industry. He worked with both commercial real estate appraisal and cost seg engineer firms and experience working with accountants, CPAs, REITs, corporations, partnerships, just a very experienced guy when it comes to cost segregation studies. And again, if you own commercial real estate, you need to know what this is. You need to have somebody like this on your team, right? That you're working with, reaching out to, and trying to see if this is the best option for you and your investors. And be sure to listen to the very end. He actually shares something at the very end of the show too that we didn't get out in the middle that I feel like is beneficial to you as well. Wes, welcome to the show. You are an expert in a piece of our business that's very important. I'll just go ahead and say, it's taxes, man, or where we can save on taxes or how we structure things is something I feel like we just can't ever learn enough about. It seems so complicated at times, but you're one of those experts that we have to have on our team that helps us, help our investors in a massive way as well. And so we're going to dive in. Wes, give us a little bit more about who you are, though, maybe your background and getting to where you're at now, and let's dive in.
Sure, man. Yeah, thanks for having me, Whitney. My name's Wes Mabry. I'm the owner of 1245 Consulting. We are a specialty tax consulting firm that specializes in cost segregation studies. I started in the cost seg field back in 2006. I was a real estate appraiser at the time, worked in that capacity for about 10 years. As a real estate appraiser, I worked for one of the only firms in the country I know of that's using appraisers exclusively for cost seg. So got good experience in the industry there, got hired away from that by an engineering firm out on the East Coast and still doing cost seg. But they had me out on the road and I would take meetings with their clients, which I had never done before. And so in that, I had a little bit of exposure to kind of the sales side of things. And the hamster wheel started turning a little bit. And then in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act came out, ushered in the 100% bonus depreciation. And I thought, hell, it sells itself now. So why not start my own firm? And I did. And it's been a wild ride ever since. We service clients nationwide, and we're still a small firm. We're a team of 9, just doing cost seg. That's it. That's our bag.
Awesome. Well, I want to jump into, we've talked about it a number of times on the show. It's been a little bit though, believe it or not. And so, but we'll start at a high level and maybe explain what cost seg is, why it's important to, people in commercial real estate on the operator side, but maybe also for passive investors.
Sure. So cost segregation is the process of accumulating depreciation to offset your income tax liability. And we do that by analyzing the building that you've acquired, identifying all of the components, spreading those components into various asset class life categories. Some of those categories you can write off quickly. Some of those are just going to take forever to get off the books. But the ones you can write off more quickly help you accumulate losses through a non-cash expense. That's depreciation in a nutshell. And part of the real estate strategy is to generate cash flow through income producing properties. And then one of the major benefits you get from being in that sector is the ability to offset the tax liability of that cash flow with depreciation. And it's a phenomenal tool. Oftentimes, investors will use it in conjunction with the 1031 exchange, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with. And it's powerful stuff, man. It helps defer income tax payments for many, many, many years. On the GP LP side, that can, you can see a variable of how things work. Some of the more established GPs in the game don't let the losses trickle down. They can hoard them. It all depends on what you've got written up in your operating agreement. If you're a very experienced LP and you don't necessarily have to pacify your investor pool, maybe you have the leverage to keep that depreciation for yourself. But there are other GPs that choose to distribute that, and it's a lever they can pull to attract investors and also help their investors along in their journey by shielding the income that the properties are kicking off. So it's a good tool for GPs to use and an important one for LPs to understand.
So why would someone use a cost segregation study versus not? I know we talked a little bit about depreciation, and I know it's accelerating that, but what's the case for somebody that shouldn't use it?
You shouldn't use it if perhaps you are expecting a huge decrease in income. Like if you don't have the income to use the losses to offset, that's a reason not to use it. Sometimes you can't use it. If you're a foreign investor, you're disqualified from bonus depreciation. You can still cost seg. If you have a tax exempt tenant in your building, you can't bonus depreciate. You can still cost seg. You just got to do it a little slower. So there's a couple reasons why you wouldn't want to go forward with the cost seg study, but for the vast majority of investors, this is a good strategy. There are some delineators between passive and non-passive losses, important things to understand. If you don't meet the IRS threshold for a professional real estate investor, then losses that you generate through real estate activity will only offset passive income. And for many folks, that's great. You get 20 G's of disbursements a year from an LP play, and then you've got some losses through depreciation you can apply only towards that passive income. That's great. That's a good strategy. It helps you shield things. However, if you're a non-passive investor, or sometimes also called an active real estate investor, then those losses generated from real estate activity can offset all kinds of things, including W-2 wages for you or your spouse. So there's some different applicability to how the losses can be used. And it's important to, I always encourage my clients to run this cost seg idea by their tax professionals because they have the full picture. Oftentimes the cost seg provider just has a little snippet of what's going on. So it's always good to kind of combine the cost segregation experience with the tax professional experience to see how to really pull all the levers you can to defer some income tax liability.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Just elaborating on that, I think it's very helpful for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar yet with what a cost segregation study is. I want us to dive through some of the step-by-steps, about getting that done as on the operator side. But then, I was just thinking about what about, different business plans that may affect whether we are or asset classes that may affect whether we should do a cost seg or not. Whether it's a Class C heavy value add versus a Class A that's brand new, right? Are we still going to do a cost seg on both of those, or is it going to be one where if it's a long term hold versus short term hold, things like that? How would that affect whether we should do a cost seg or not?
So if you're doing the Class C with the heavy lift, you've got a couple different capital outlays, we'll call them. You've got your acquisition, you're buying the structure that you're going to repair or fix up or mark to market, whatever. And that is an opportunity to segregate costs. You have costs there in the initial acquisition. You bought a building. It's got, parking, fencing, landscaping, interior assets, appliances, flooring, millwork, window coverings, all those things. You should get analyzed. You can draw out losses from that. And then when you begin to do your value add, there is another capital outlay. And this may even take years as tenants turn over, as tenants move out, units turn over. You've got additional capital outlay. You've got additional opportunity to segregate costs. Let's look at a typical unit turn. You replace the floor. You can take some bonus depreciation on that. Maybe you change out the appliance package. You can take depreciation on that. You add a little water hookup where there wasn't one. You can take depreciation on that. Most of the stuff you do in the bathroom is not going to qualify. Your paint's not going to be able to be accelerated. Drywall work, maybe that's an expense item. We can talk about that later. But the point is this, for the heavy lift guy, there's multiple opportunities to utilize cost segregation. For your listeners, maybe they go out and buy a value add. Absolutely. That thing's ready to go. You've got some depreciation in there. It's worth exploring cost segregation for sure. And then through the asset class spectrum, some perform better than others. And when I say perform, I mean perform under analysis. We'll go in, we'll look at the property, we'll identify components that can be depreciated more quickly than others. And the ones that perform well, apartments, they do pretty good. Assisted living facilities,
Right.
senior communities, they have some of similar elements as apartments do, but they've also got that administrative piece. They have rehab facilities in there, often full kitchens, where we'll find additional opportunities for depreciation. Those are excellent performing assets. There's special carve outs in the tax code for your car wash listeners. You can write off the whole damn thing. I mean, it's 100% almost. It's high, upper 90s when we think of it in terms of what can be reclassed. Car washes, quick service oil change places, special carve out for those. They perform extraordinarily well. Specialty manufacturing facilities, they do great under cost seg analysis. Climate controlled storage, really well. Regular drive up storage still does pretty good. Your Airbnbs, your single family guys, those are fairly pedestrian in terms of what we find in cost seg. The ones that don't do as well, like warehousing, you kind of walk into a building, you look left, you look right, there's not a lot there. Oftentimes there's more opportunities for depreciation outside those facilities than there are inside those facilities. Still worth doing. Quick service restaurants do phenomenally well because they're very specialized. And also, strip centers, we see a lot of those. Depends on the tenant mix. If it's a lot of big box stores, like your dollar store, your hardware store, and the card and gift shop, those do fairly well. When you start adding to the mix a lot of restaurants, they do much, much better in terms of what you'll see reclassed.
Nice. No, that's helpful. You even mentioned like an Airbnb model made me think of this, and often on the show we wouldn't maybe call this commercial real estate unless you were at scale, with them. But I was even thinking about that investor who, because we all know like commercial real estate, a lot of the asset classes, things you mentioned, we need to do a cost seg. We're going to accelerate that, for us and our investors. I even thought on the other end of that, say I buy a single family home, we're going to Airbnb it. We might keep it. Our plan may be to keep it long term, right? Do we still need to, could we still benefit from a cost seg on that as well?
Heck yeah. We did over 200 Airbnbs last year. And the unique thing about what it's technically called the short-term rental class is that, and just we'll throw some parameters around it. Short-term rental, average lease under 30 days. So, you could mess that up if you have an Airbnb and you block off 6 months for one tenant. So do some homework around that. Make sure your average lease is under 30 days. And then if it is, you're technically operating a hotel in the eyes of the tax code. And so it actually is a commercial property and not a residential facility. And that's a great thing because when you make improvements to those types of properties, you're eligible for qualified improvement property regulations, which is something we can dive into a little deeper if you want. But an Airbnb is really just a house. The duration of the lease is what separates that from just your standard rent home. We do a lot of rent homes as well. Portfolios of single family rentals still do pretty well in cost segregation. Just to paint it with a wide brush, for every 100,000 in basis, you're probably going to find in a short-term rental 12,000 in losses in the first year. So
yeah,
it's worth it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I know there's probably a number of listeners who also have Airbnbs who have not thought about, a cost segregation study on those assets. So just wanted to allow you to
Asset
elaborate
class
there.
has just been smoking hot over the last few years. I think with the frothy rate environment, we're seeing some folks kind of say, hey, well, maybe we need to slow down this acquisition piece here. But for the most part, man, we still see an absolute ton of short-term rentals.
Yeah. Give us a few of the steps, through the cost segregation process, but maybe highlight a place or two where, things that come up that are unexpected. Maybe people aren't prepared for, or they mess up during the process, or, it's like, man, you got to know this thing if we're going to do a cost seg study.
The biggest kind of first trap we see is when clients will buy, it's particularly coastal clients. They'll buy some property. I was like, oh, great, we got 2 million in this little hotel. We're going to convert it to short-term rentals, and yeah, great. We have this massive bucket of costs that we're going to be able to chop up and take losses on. And then when they get into the cost seg portion of it, they realize that so much of that value is tied up in the land that maybe they're only depreciating less than half of what they paid to get into that property. The IRS issued some guidance in 2019 that encouraged taxpayers to use the county record in absence of some other defensible opinion of value. They use the county record to value the land. And so you pull the county records, you got a land value, you got improvement value, and you got a total value. And they want you to run a quick ratio on land to total, apply that to what you paid in order to back out land. Land's the non-depreciable component. Can't help you with land value, can't write it off, just sits on the books. And so when we deal with these clients, we're like, hey, you've got a decision you need to make here, risk adjusted as you will, very low chance of audit currently, as the IRS sits, sub 2% for any taxpayer. They may choose to get a little aggressive with land. They may choose to play it by the book. It all depends on, how they've acquired the capital. If they're fiduciaries and they have LPs to protect, maybe they want to play it a little more conservatively. If they're just running their own game, maybe it's you and your brother-in-law or something. Maybe you want to choose to get a little more aggressive with it. So the land issue is the first kind of thing that we see. There's some recapture taxes on the back end. So if your hold is near term, I mean, you certainly don't want to cost seg if you're flipping a property, but if you've got a pretty tight hold window, then it at least be aware of what a recapture tax is. It's a tax on sale of the depreciation that you've taken. Most of it will be taxed at your ordinary tax rate instead of cap gains. There's an arbitrage there. So odds are your personal tax rate's going to be higher than the cap gain rate. And so you're going to pay a little bit higher tax on sale on the depreciation that you took. I don't like my clients to be surprised by that. So I always make effort to have the discussion. And then there are times when we'll see clients buying a property and their intent is to gut it. And maybe they bought a little bit later in the year, so they won't actually be in place or in service in the following year. And if your intent is to demolish, the IRS doesn't want you taking depreciation on things that you intend to throw in the trash the same year you make an acquisition. So those are some of the kind of gray clouds, if you will, that enter into the cost seg discussion. But overall, particularly in the bonus depreciation environment, it's a pretty impactful strategy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I just, before we have to move to a few final questions, I want to know too, for the listener, when do they engage somebody like yourself? We're buying a piece of commercial real estate or whatever it may be. When should we loop somebody like yourself in, as far as through the acquisition process, or if it's 5 years later, we've owned it for many years, what does that look like?
We see interest on both the pre and post acquisition side. For some clients, it's, hey, I'm thinking about buying this property. Let me go touch base with my cost seg guy and see what the loss might look like so that they can make some pre-tax and post-tax penciling, basically. But the majority of what we see is post-acquisition, and folks have us on their checklist just like they have their insurance walkthrough, their post-acquisition DD that they may want to do for whatever plans they have for the property. But certainly you never want to actually conduct the study until you've closed the deal. So you don't want to bring in your cost seg guy formally until you take ownership, because things can, deals fall apart all the time. So it's okay to test the waters, see what the loss may look like ahead of closing, but you certainly don't want to engage until you've got things going.
What's the biggest challenge in your business right now, Wes?
Competition, man. Seems like there's a firm popping up every couple months. They're getting in there. They're driving the price point down. And competition's a good thing. There's always something to learn from other competitors out in the field. But we kind of hang our hat on experience. We've been doing this a long time. We're good at what we do. We stay abreast of tax legislation, and we've got folks with experience going out in the field and touching properties. There's still things that we do remotely, but for the most part, we're going to go out and actually see what you bought.
What's going to, set one cost seg firm out from another? Like what are maybe something that the listener should ask, a firm like yourself so we know, what's going to be different from one to another that we should be aware of?
We're seeing a lot of remote analysis pop up, and that may not always be the best course of action for certain asset classes. So that can be a differentiator. If you're finding pricing maybe sub 3,000, I would say, are you actually going to come out, or is someone with experience going to come out and look at my facility, whether it be using an online walkthrough tool or just an exchange of documentation? You kind of want to make sure that they've got some folks on staff that have actually seen buildings before. I guess the tenant mix doesn't really play into it too often, but there are times when bonus depreciation is not gonna work for you. But there's a lot of good players in the space. There's a lot of good firms out there that do great jobs for folks, and vet them like any contractor. Do you have references? Can I see a sample? We have redacted reports for almost every asset class that we're happy to share.
What are maybe a few of the most important metrics that you track? It could be personally or professionally.
We always like to keep our thumb on the pulse of the number of proposals that we're sending out. That's always an indicator of how busy we're going to be. We are just under 8 weeks away from the extension deadline for individuals. And then after that, partnerships. So we like to kind of see when things are ramping up. And then we also like to measure our turnaround time. I mean, we're 4 to 6 weeks like most firms, try to get it done sooner rather than later, but we keep track of that. Time to the site is another one. We get engaged, and how long does it take to actually go out and visit the property is another metric we take. And then we recently started measuring our engineers on the time it takes them to finalize the report, beginning when they have everything they need to get the report done. So there's a couple of just operational metrics that we keep track of, and then also on the sales side.
What about some habits that you are disciplined about that have helped you achieve the highest return?
I have recently started using virtual assistants to help me manage my email inbox. I have it monitored almost 24 hours a day now. There's a lot of emails that I get that I just don't need to be typing up that response to. It's not a good use of my time. So they have given them like pre-populated responses for certain things. Calendly, I have the hardest time saying that word, has helped me immensely in that. There's important things, and you just need to block off times of your week to schedule to handle those, particularly interactions with clients. So really time management, I think, to answer your question directly, has been my biggest focus over the last couple of months. And it has been a difference maker for me. I really don't thoroughly check emails until about 10 o'clock. And then I'll have just a kind of a narrow list of things I need to look at instead of this expansive list of stuff that's really not that critical. And then I do it again at 2. And man, my staff is just amazing. Wish I could hug every one of them every day. It helps me be a better businessman and a better dad. And those are just super important for me.
Yeah, I appreciate the insight there. Even something like email management, that's something that used to just consume my life. I felt like,
Oh,
it was emails and it still could. It can so easily just suck me in, for way too long, right? But I agree, man, having an assistant or a VA, we just did a show yesterday on virtual assistants. So I would encourage the listener to look at that as well. But one thing I'll tell you that we have used, or me personally, and my assistant, is something called the stack method. And if you Google it, it'll come up. You'll find it. But it's called the stack method, and it's just a way to categorize your emails, or for your assistant to categorize them. So, like things you need to refer back to, or things that only I can reply to, things that are going to take me longer than 5 minutes to reply to, or things that are shorter than 5 minutes. Like things. So if I'm just standing, in line at the airport for 10 minutes, hey, I might be able to go knock a few quick emails out, right? Or there may just be a couple of things that I personally have to see right, that she can't respond to or whatever, and it helps me to narrow that down pretty quickly, of what I can focus on depending on the amount of time that I have at the moment. But anyway, yeah,
That's good. I'll take a look at that. It sounds kind of like what we're doing, but if there's some ways to tweak it, I'm all about it, man. It's been a fun rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, well, if you have a different method, I'd love to see it too. It may help us also. I would love to know. But anyway, it's just a free thing we found online, and it's been pretty helpful. But what would you say is the number one thing that's contributed to your success?
Oh, man, hat tip to my wife. If she didn't have a really good job, I probably wouldn't have cut that W-2 cord and gone out on my own. So, you got to start from somewhere, and having a really supportive partner helps that immensely. I think other things contributing to my success are just trying to make smart bets, really thinking about that next step, secondary and tertiary consequences of it helps a lot. And then focus on marketing. Sales is the lifeblood of every business, and marketing, it seems like it changes shape so often these days. We're not too many years removed from TV, print, and radio. And what we've found in front of us is this incredible landscape full of opportunities to tell your story and share your knowledge. And I find it almost like it entices me to just participate in it. In what we're doing here. I mean, this is something that really wasn't available to a lot of people not too many years ago.
And how do you like to give back?
I like to give back locally. I like to give back to the environment, and got a little bit of hippie in me in that regard. There's a quote about, once you can reach some level of success, it's incumbent on you to send the elevator back down and pull someone back up. And doing that through education and finding ways to provide opportunities for others who may not otherwise be able to afford it is something I'm pretty passionate about. There are, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, there are a lot of folks in commercial real estate that look like you and me. And finding ways to change that dynamic is something that I spend a lot of time on.
Awesome. Wes, I'm grateful to have met you and had you on the show. And just laying out this thing of cost segregation. What is that? Who does that apply to? Who is it best for or not? And then just some of the process or pitfalls as well that we need to be aware of as commercial real estate operators and as passive investors. So grateful for your time today and giving back to us in that way. How can the listeners get in touch with you and learn more about you?
Wes at 1245consulting.com is my email address. Pretty easy guy to get a hold of. I still answer the phone around here. Not sure how much longer I can manage that, but I still do it. So Wes Mabry at 1245 Wes at 1245consulting.com, and we're all over the place on Twitter. We're on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to look me up. I'd like to share one thing with your listeners before we close it out.
Please.
And that is the qualified improvement property regulations that are still on the books. I know you're multifamily centric, so it doesn't apply to you. But for your folks out there in the commercial space, if you're spending money rehabbing something that is non-residential, one of the big things of cost seg is the structure doesn't count. You can't accelerate it. It just takes 39 years to write it off in the non-residential space. But if you make improvements to the interior of your building, the qualified improvement property regs don't treat those as 39-year assets anymore. They treat them as 15-year assets. And because they're 15-year, they're bonus eligible. So in the normal circumstances, drywall, interior framing, HVAC components, plumbing, electrical, bathroom rehabs, while you can't accelerate those at acquisition, if you go in and rehab a facility, you can get bonus on those. And we're seeing a lot of rehab work that the return on investment for getting a pro to come out there and do a cost seg on that is absolutely phenomenal. I highly recommend it if you're swinging hammer on something that is not multifamily. Look into it. It's a good shot in the arm.
Thank you for being with us again today. I hope that you have learned a lot from the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're telling your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show and how they can also build wealth in real estate. You can also go to lifebridgecapital.com and start investing today.